Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40K lore, where today we are going to talk about the greatest, the biggest, the richest, and most successful Orc freebooters captain to have ever lived, Badrukk, the king of the freebooters. Granted, that title is mostly something that he himself made up and has since been busily enforcing against anyone and everyone who has ever disagreed, but still, the very fact that he is able to so forcefully enforce it upon other orcs with threats of scuppering, murder, and general destruction being effective motivating factors in ensuring that others respect Badruck's self-evident greatness. And he is surely and certainly rather great. Badruck's title and reputation are not entirely made up, though significant portions of it probably is, as Badruck has been known to spin a tale or two. For example, he has oft told the tale of how he managed to hunt and kill a void whale, presumably all by his lonesome, with very little, if any, aid from his crew or his kill cruiser, which is a mightily impressive feat, considering a void whale measures something along the lines of 12,000 kilometers from tip to tail, or 7,500 miles, or roughly the distance between Scotland to Malaysia. Like I said, an impressive undertaking, and perhaps likely to be mildly exaggerated, though there are certainly parts of Badruck's legacy that can actually be proven to be true. For example, he is one of the only creatures out there in the galaxy that have managed to outshoot the Tau, and perhaps even more impressively, outfox them as well, employing his own Orky version of the Kaoyun and the Mont Ka, effectively beating the Blueberries at their very own game. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let us, as always, start at the beginning. Badrukk hails from the Bad Moons clan, a clan famous for its wealth, affluence, and greed. A clan that Badrukk was exiled from for being too greedy. That's right. The clan, known for its greed, penny pinching, and penchants for money and penchants for hoarding wealth, exiled Badrukk for being too greedy, too stingy, and for having too large of a personal fortune. Again, impressive. Though, bear you in mind, seeing as the primary and near universal and only orc currency are teeth, you can probably envision one way or another that an up-and-coming and ambitious Bad Moons boys might find himself with a tremendous quantity of enemies if he managed to acquire a truly astounding quantity of teeth. Regardless, however, of how Badrukk came about his fortune, spoiler alert, it was through violence, he took fairly well, honestly, to his exile. Being sent out into the cold darkness of the void, he very soon managed to accrue a significant personal fortune, which was largely invested into a series of ever greater and grander warships, culminating finally in the enormous and heavily customized kill cruiser that he commands today, the Blacktooth. Or, more correctly, the Blacktooth. Somewhat unusually for freebooters, this appears to be the one and only vessel under Badruck's direct and personal command. In many cases, a orc freebooter war boss of his standing would be commanding an entire flotilla of warships of many different shapes and sizes, as successful orc war bosses and freebooters are no exception, tend to attract a significant following of other orcs, suggesting quite clearly that Badruck is very picky when it comes to his subordinates, or alternatively, that he really just doesn't think he can trust them, which is not particularly surprising, as Badruck as well has developed a remarkable reputation for treachery. And considering it is a time-honored tradition to always betray any and all partners that you can get away with betraying, either through force or guile, the fact that Badruck is particularly famous for treacherous actions, yet again, is very, very impressive. That is not to say, however, that Badruck does not value talent. The Black Tooth is, of course, filled to the absolute gills with tens of thousands of orcs, every bit as greedy, if not quite as cunning, as their captain. Badruck has also been known to go on active recruiting sprees amongst the allies of fellow warbosses, taking talented greenskins much like he frequently steals a significant portion of his friends' and family's loot as well. For example, a recent acquisition of which Badruck is particularly proud is the Big Mech Mogrock, a very brainy big boy orc who once served with significant distinction under the war boss Gruck. Now Gruck, as his name may already indicate, was not the cleverest of orcs, nor the sneakiest, nor the most intelligent, or even actually the biggest or the strongest, but he was an excellent puppet for another orc that had all of those attributes, Mogrock. And Gruck also served as a convenient target for any would-be usurpers. Tragically, however, Mogrock's story was cut somewhat short when his master's warband was brutally defeated by the Imperium during the Red Warg. Fleeing the inevitable consequences of being caught by huge quantities of irate humans, Mogrock eventually found himself out on his own. Tragically, though, Mogrock's immediate tactical acumen and ability to run a warband from the shadows did not directly translate into strategic skills. And so he found himself in very, very, very deep doo-doo after he had decided to invade an Imperial night world. Optimistic. And Mogrock only survived due to the fact that Badruck clearly thought that he was worth saving, and so pulled his little green hide from the flames. Ever since, he's been serving Badruck as his favored big mech, keeping the Black Tooth running and also carrying out minute little adjustments on Badruck's most prized possession of all, his heavily customized shooter, the Ripper. See, at heart, Badruck is a flash git. An orc that loves big, fancy guns with enormous cycle rates and preferably very loud boomy noises that produces enormous explosions somewhere in the general direction of over there, hopefully amongst the enemy. But if the odd occasional shot should veer off course and land amongst friendly ranks here and there, then, well, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And indeed, Badruck's personal private cohort of elite orcs, which usually lead any invasion or raid that he's involved in, is a band of enormously well-equipped flash kits, the force that outshot the Tau, an event that we'll talk about a little bit later. The Ripper, however, is a particularly special gun even amongst the ranks of the Flash Gits. See, as already mentioned, the Flash Gits favor weapons with both very high cycle rates and extraordinarily devastating effects against the enemy. In search of the best possible mix of the two, Badruck has managed to acquire a massive Ripper gun from a fallen Ogryn bodyguard of a defeated Imperial foe. This provided Badruck with an excellent chassis for a customized shooter, in that it was bloody enormous. And that was really all he cared about. He decided then to further customize the weapon, extensively so, and probably with the help of either Mogrok himself or other big mechs, to get rid of the original ammunition, as whilst a regular Ripper gun fires enormous bullets, it doesn't fire really quite enough of them. And a caliber munitions merely the size of a grown man's fist, well, it's rather basic bitch when you come to think of it. And so instead, Badruck's weapon was customized to fire extraordinarily unstable entire plasma magazines. That's right, not bolts of plasma, not individual bursts, gobulets, or shots of plasma, but simply just entire plasma containers. Now, that alone would be enough to basically make a handheld anti-tank weapon, but it didn't quite create the effect that Badruck had originally intended and hoped for. It certainly had a decent effect upon the enemy, and due to the fact that they were firing now full containers, the cycle rate could be impressive indeed, but it could be more devastating. Badruck was warned repeatedly, even by Ork scientists, which should tell you something, that messing around with the weapon any further would be extraordinarily hazardous. He was already using a gun to fire unstable ammunition that it was never designed to eject, and to mess with the ammunition yet further was pure and simple folly, but through threats, or even possibly, quite likely, the execution of aggressive violence, Badruck convinced the big mechs to yet further destabilize the ammunition, to the point where now he is firing overcharged, highly unstable, and extraordinarily radioactive caskets of plasma energy. To the point that if it was not for his specially designed, extraordinarily heavy, lead-lined armor, Badruck himself would die from simply discharging the weapon. Which lends an entirely new meaning to the term friendly fire. He doesn't even have to hit you to kill you. All he's really got to do to murder his fellow orcs is stand near them as he shoots his gun. Wow. Yet again, I've got to say it again, that is impressive. And of course, to finish the job, somebody attached a knife under the barrel. That goddamn gun is so dangerous, you will die from merely being near it when fired. But still, the orc mind demands a sharp, pointy thing beneath the barrel. You gotta admire the determination, really, you must. It is quite remarkable. And one of these days, eventually, the radiation will presumably seep through the countless layers of shielding in Badruck's armor and put him out of his happiness. Alternatively, the weapon will simply have had enough and, go nuclear in his hands. But up until that day, the Ripper continues to provide Badruck with enormous entertainment and personal satisfaction. The only thing he could possibly enjoy any more would be to fire all of the guns of his kill cruiser all at once into the broadside of a poor, exposed, vulnerable enemy warship. As Badruck, being a freebooter, of course, has a long and proud history of plying the void lanes. Indeed, one of his very first major and significant successes was in a void war against a Tyranid hive fleet, where, as a part of a wider orc effort, Badruck's Black Tooth blunted an invasion by hive fleet Kraken. Merely a tendril, mind you, not the entire thing, but still quite the achievement, by plunging directly into the entire Tyranid fleet, presumably smashing gargoyles and other larger creatures across the windshields of his personal kill cruiser. Many, many thumping noises could no doubt be heard against the hull, accompanied swiftly by the hissing of acid eating through aforementioned hull, after which the Tyranids started streaming in and devouring the crew. But considering an Ork's penchant for close quarters combat, that was, if anything, merely just a bonus. This would appear, of course, to be an incredibly stupid suicidal maneuver, as even an Ork ship is going to have a hard time coming out on top of ramming a Tyranid tendril. But Badruck knew something that the enemy did not, and that was that he was both significantly more cunning and significantly more retarded than the Tyranids could possibly imagine. Even in the deepest, darkest depths of their alien minds, they could never have foreseen a scenario in which a crazed alien would take his warship, steer it straight into the heart of their flock, aimed directly at the central Norn Queen ship, the very heart of the tendril, without whom the entire fleet would be deprived of its synaptic connection to the hive mind and shatter. Well, Badruck decided to ram that ship. Straight up, straight on, and then board it, presumably tearing the entire damn thing apart, one nerve ending at a time, or simply just unloading every forward-facing weapon straight into its guts until it was rent asunder in space. And somehow, miraculously, Badruck emerged from all of this alive. Although, exploits like this makes me think that, you know, the Black Tooth, his favorite warship, somehow, I suspect, that's not the first ship to bear that particular name. Oh well. Any naval battle you can walk away from is a successful naval battle. And Badruck has continued to evolve and develop his naval strategies over numerous engagements, even introducing new and novel ideas such as using massed teleportation strikes directly onto the decks of enemy warships. This is rather unusual, firstly because teleportation in 40K is a derpy affair, and not very safe. Even with a teleportation beacon, which is meant to fix the nearby area and provide self-teleportation, it still bears a significant risk of teleporting you directly into a bulkhead, or into the ground, or a few hundred meters up in the sky, etc. Without a teleportation beacon, and I'll give you 3 guesses as to whether or not the Orks use teleportation beacons, the risk is, frankly, suicidal. But Badruck does not care, having repeatedly used the enormous custom-made teleportarum aboard his kill cruiser, in and of itself, again, a remarkable feat, as teleportation arrays of that size requires huge quantities of power, not to mention unfathomably difficult to replicate technology, too. The fact that he's got enough of them to effectively land massed strike forces capable of sustaining the egregious casualties caused during teleportation. Again, I feel like I'm wearing out the word here, but impressive. He's even used the teleportarum to launch strikes down on planets, even more complicated than ship to ship in many cases. And it's become a core part of his strategy, dumping himself and his favored flash gets directly into the midst of the enemy, after which they tear them apart with brutal volleys of massed Ork firepower. It was one of these tactics that allowed him to fight 101 with the Tau. This was during one of his dalliances with another Ork warboss. At the time, you see, the Ork warboss Grog Ironteeth had decided to invade a piece of Tau space after having followed a Kroot warship, a warsphere, all the way back home. Grog had found that the Kroots were excellent combatants and really gosh darn fun to fight. And so he'd involved himself in a lengthy ground war until the Tau arrived to spoil the fucking fun. Suddenly, Grog wasn't merely fighting the Kroot, who were quite amusing to fight, really. Instead, he was fighting a bunch of faggoty little blueberry pieces of shit who would never stand around long enough to actually get in a scrap. Instead, they would fire their dumb, blue, flashy weapons and then flee immediately. The most terrifically boring form of warfare. And also, incidentally, the reason why everybody hates the Tau. Oh god, I still remember when the Tau were first released. You don't understand. The Tau could shoot and move. And move and shoot and move. They could literally bounce up on a hill, shoot at you, and bounce back behind the hill again. Oh god, they were such cancer. A sentiment shared precisely by Grog Ironteeth, who acquired the services of Badrukk in order to help him even things out. Now, Badruck is no stranger to being hired by fellow Ork war chiefs. He's done it on many an occasion, playing mercenary, like many freebooters like to do. Badruck charges an exorbitant sum for doing so, and usually also takes yet a greater sum by, well, stealing it, and or extorting it from his allies, but his abilities to turn things around means that many war bosses still value his contribution. In this case, he turned out to be a very wise hire indeed, as Badrukk was able to match the Tau shot for shot with his flash kits. Suddenly, the Tau found themselves in a situation where they were actually being outfired by the Orks, and had to rely on ever greater numbers of crises battlesuits and broadside battlesuits in order to level the playing field. This meant in turn that the Tau actually had to use more and more, relatively speaking, heavy and relatively immobile equipment. Realizing this, and having seen enough of the Tau's tactics, Badruck decided to take a little page out of their playbook. This, too, is rather unusual for an Ork. Having seen that the Tau like to hit hard, then retreat, drawing the Orks forward to only then hit them even harder when they had been placed in an disadvantageous position, Badruck copied them. He coined a brand new term, a new strategy virtually unheard of across all of Ork kind. A tactic mastered only by a handful of the most competent, the most ferocious, and most feared of Ork warbosses. The tactical retreat. And yes, that is as impressive as it sounds, as making an Ork voluntarily withdraw from a fight. Damn, that might actually be his greatest feat so far. He managed to get his Orks to pretend to be beaten by the Tau, to fall back in maddened disarray. Or maybe he simply herded warbands against the enemy until the Tau shattered them. That too is a very much so a possible interpretation. Meanwhile, the lion's share of Badruck's forces were hanging back, way out of reach of those creepy little Tau pathfinders, and out of sight of their advanced sensor packages, thus employing the Tau strategy of the Kayun, the patient hunter, waiting for the enemy to come to him. As the Tau set off after the fleeing Orks, intent on surrounding and destroying them completely, as they had long since learned that if they let the Orks go away, they'd always come back in even greater numbers. Then Badruck launched his version of the Montkar, the killing blow. Once the tower had moved into a properly disadvantageous position, flash gets emerged from all around them, laying down a torrent of firepower, ripping apart Tau fire warriors before they could mount their IFVs, bracketing and destroying Crises battlesuits before their thrusters could bear them up into the sky, and annihilating broadside weapon systems before they could draw bead on the surrounding foe. Now, the Tau were the one that found themselves surrounded and were methodically and deliberately destroyed as a result. Unfortunately for the Orks, the Tau then did what the Tau so often do and adopted their tactics yet again. This time in a rather fascinating direction, as under the command of the rather legendary Commander Farsight, the Tau instead began focusing on close-quarters assaults against the Orks, moving in rapidly and preferably undetected to unleash devastating short-range, overwhelming firepower before the Orks could react, turning their horde mentality against them by forcing them to conduct multiple staged retreats, meaning that once they'd broken them, the Tau would back off, allow them to reform, and then inflict maximum casualties yet again. Embracing, in essence, a form of large-scale attritional warfare against the Orks. This would extend the war by God only knows how long, but it would avoid further Tau massacres. As a further step, as they'd noted that the Orks had begun to loot their war gear and integrate it into their own weapon systems, the Tau summarized that 1, the Orks were capable of doing so, which was a significant danger in and of itself, and 2, the Orks seemed to view the looting of the battlefield as an event in and of itself, as they observed war bosses go out of their way to secure a particularly interesting piece of loot. Reasoning, therefore, that there was some sort of societal significance to the act of looting. Commander Farsight therefore organized special formations of engineers and Earthcast to swoop in after a battle specifically to extract any and all weapons and crisis battlesuits possible and get them out of the hands of the Orks and empty the battlefield before the Orks could get to it or start looting properly. This was an extraordinarily successful tactic, as a lot of Orks just kind of grew tired of the fact that there wasn't any glory to be had, there wasn't any fun to be had, and now there wasn't any more loot to be had either. No fancy shiny Tau weaponry, no overpowered plasma guns, no fanciful battlesuits to turn into stompers and death dreads. What even is the point of this war then? Seeing significant numbers of Ork warbands, including Badruck himself, eventually abandoning the Ork efforts. Also eventually seeing the death of Ork warboss Grog Arentooth, to be replaced by Nazdarek Ugrub, who would continue to plague the Tau Imperium for quite some time thereafter, before also being maybe dispatched by Commander Farsight. Incidentally, mere minutes before a Chaos Fleet arrived. Why? Well, because the Tau are so isolated that the enemy has to kind of come to them for them to make any sort of narrative sense for them to be fighting stuff. Which is why Tau, Orks, Eldar have gone really far out of their way to come play with the Tau Septs. But none of this concerned Badruck, as he had gotten all of the loot he could possibly desire. Enormous quantities of Tau weaponry to further enhance his private arsenal. And so he left quite happy, no doubt also taking along with him a significant quantity of bonus booty from the Ork allies that he'd fought alongside. Even today, Badruck is still a successful freebooter, plying the void and offering his services to war bosses of particularly wide mouths, I guess, considering the currency in question, or profoundly generous gums. whichever version you prefer, really. And he shows no sign of stopping, as he's survived everything the galaxy has thrown at him so far. Space wolves, Tau, Tyranids, Chaos, you mention it, he's fought it and defeated it, usually in spectacular fashion. And looking absolutely fantastic whilst doing so. Particularly the old 90s miniatures with the giant square Japanese-esque flags. That is a wonderful, handsome, and dapper bunch of lads right there. But for now, I will bid you adieu. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.